Ms. Miller, you're next.
Thank you. Is this on? Yes.
Yeah, you might pull Judy a little closer to make sure.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chairman Baucus, Ranking Member Hatch, and members of the committee for the opportunity to speak with you today. I'm Judy Miller, Chief of Actuarial Issues and Director of Retirement Policy for the American Society of Pension Professionals and Actuaries. We want to thank this committee for its leadership in passing the Pension Protection Act of 2006. PPA had overwhelming bipartisan support from this committee and the entire Congress, and by permanently extending changes to various retirement plan rules, PPA provided needed certainty for workplace retirement plans. Proposals currently under discussion, slashing the contribution limits or turning the current year's exclusion into a credit, would discourage small business owners from setting up or maintaining a workplace plan. This is the exact opposite of what needs to be done. Data clearly shows the primary factor in determining whether or not a worker is saving for retirement is whether or not they have a retirement plan at work. When evaluating any current retirement policy proposal, the critical question this committee must ask is, will it improve access to workplace retirement savings? Many of these flawed proposals are based on some persistent myths. Myth 1, less than half of workers have access to retirement savings at work. This myth is dangerous because it gives the impression current incentives have failed when facts show otherwise. Bureau of Labor Statistics data shows 78% of all full-time workers have access to a workplace retirement plan, with 84% participating. If you look only at private sector workers, 73% have access to a plan, with 80% participating. This is a far cry from the less than half commonly cited. Myth 2, the current tax incentive is upside down. This myth arises from a failure to recognize that the incentives for workplace retirement plans are different from just about any other tax incentive in the code. Non-discrimination rules make sure that retirement plan incentives don't discriminate in favor of the highly paid and limit pay that can be counted toward benefits. The result is the current tax incentive for employer-sponsored defined contribution plans is more progressive than the current income tax system. Based on an analysis by a former JCT economist, taxpayers making less than $50,000 pay only 8% of income taxes but receive 30% of tax incentives for defined contribution plans. Households making less than $100,000 pay 26% of income taxes but get over 60% of the benefit of this tax incentive. By contrast, households making more than $200,000 pay 52% of income taxes but receive only 11% of the retirement plan tax incentives. 60% of a tax incentive going to workers that pay less than 30% of income taxes is not upside down. It's very much right side up. Myth 3, small businesses will sponsor retirement plans without an appropriate tax incentive. I spent over 20 years talking to small business owners in Montana about why they should set up and keep operating a retirement plan. With rare exceptions, the current tax savings was a critical factor, often the only factor, supporting the decision to put in a plan. It's not that small business owners are selfish or they don't want to help their employees save for retirement. In real life, most small business owners aren't sitting on lots of cash. They use the savings generated from the retirement plan tax incentives to help pay for contributions required by the non-discrimination rules. Reducing the incentive literally reduces the cash the small business owner has to work with. There's not a doubt in my mind that reduced incentives will mean fewer plans or lower employer contributions for the plans that remain. Myth 4, it doesn't matter if a new tax structure causes employers to terminate plans because re-engineering the tax incentive will lead more workers to save on their own. Truth is, the only way we have ever gotten working Americans to save for retirement is through employer-sponsored retirement plans. Over 70% of workers making $30,000 to $50,000 contribute when covered by a plan at work. By comparison, less than 5% of workers at the same income levels save on their own in an IRA when there's no workplace plan. This is a startling difference in savings rates. Changing the exclusion to a credit will never make up this difference. Increasing plan coverage is a much simpler task with more certain results. Myth 5, tax incentives for retirement savings are lost revenue. Unlike deductions for mortgage interest or charitable contributions, which are permanent deductions, the incentives for retirement savings are a deferral. Contributions and earnings are taxed at ordinary income rates when distributed from the plan. The truth is, the revenue you think you gained in the budget window from cutting retirement savings is an illusion. Reduced contributions today mean lower revenue outside the budget window when there will be less retirement savings to be withdrawn and taxed. In summary, given existing pressures on Social Security, this is not the time for a massive experiment with workers' 401k plans. We need a tune-up, not an overhaul. The key to promoting retirement security is expanded workplace savings, and reduced incentives for small business owners to sponsor plans would be a big step in the wrong direction. I'd be pleased to discuss these issues further with the committee or answer any questions you have. Thank you very much.
Ms. Miller, you talked about tuning up the system, not overhauling it. What do you mean by tuning up? And in your answer to your question, please address some of the questions that have been raised. Basically, the underlying question that not enough people save them.
Sure.
Either they don't belong to a defined contribution plan because they don't work, or their plan's not that great, or people leave their jobs, and so on and so forth. If you could just please tell us how we tune up in a way that addresses the underlying problem.
Sure. As I mentioned, I think the first real basic problem is access. And in order to get more small employers, particularly into the system, I think we need to look at ways to simplify qualified retirement plans and make the cost lower. If you look at any survey of small business that doesn't sponsor a plan and why they don't sponsor a plan, top of the list is always economic concerns. You know, the business isn't stable. They're worried about having to make contributions. They don't like the idea of having to make contributions for a short-time person, that kind of thing, more business concerns. So I think we can look at, there's been a lot of discussion lately about a structure called a multiple employer plan, for example, where you have a sponsor and small business can join basically a large group to spread expenses, reduce costs. But there are some concerns about those right now, or about who can sponsor them, how Treasury would be able to, deal with them as a large group. It doesn't take a lot of changes, and there are, as I said, there are some proposals we think they need improving. We're working on a set of proposals ourselves for that. I think that could be very effective. I think some of the issues that Karen mentioned are issues that sometimes I think there's an artificial distinction made between defined benefit and defined contribution plans. And, you know, I'm an actuary, so I have strong affinity for a defined benefit plan. But you can have managed investments in a defined contribution plan. That might not be the tendency, but I think in PPA, another great thing that you did was modifying the qualified default investment rules.
What about the point Dr. Gill makes that the incentives are upside down?
Well, as I said, I really just think that's wrong and is based on a misunderstanding of how the system works. There's a chart in my testimony that shows that how the benefits are allocated compared to the portion of taxes that are paid. And when over 60% of the benefits are going to people making under $100,000, that I don't think is an upside-down tax benefit. They're only paying less than 30% of the taxes, so it actually shifts them in that direction.
Give you a chance, Dr. Gill. You've heard what Ms. Miller said. Is it or is it not upside down? Ms. Miller's anxiously trying to.
I am, because I think this analysis assumes that all contributions are elective deferrals. They're contributions that people elect to make to the plan on their own behalf. And in reality, we have these non-discrimination rules that make sure that if an employer wants to get a significant contribution under these programs, they have to make a contribution on behalf of employees. Now, if they are making a 3% contribution or a 5% contribution, which in most small businesses the minimum would be 3 and very commonly 5, that gets no credit. That individual has a 0% tax bracket. You're saying, oh, there's no benefit for that person from this system if you look strictly at the marginal tax rate times the contribution, whereas they're getting 3% of pay for that employer. And if you remove the incentive for that employer to put in the plan, then these non-discrimination rules don't get to really fully operate, and they're not getting any contribution. So right now, instead of having to pony up some money, these lower paid people are getting employer contributions, and it really works in a pretty slick fashion.
Ms. Miller, what does your real-world experience working with people, with business people, making these decisions tell you?
Well, my experience is what you suspect it would be, sir. The tax benefit is very, very key to setting up these arrangements. Usually you have an employer who, a small business owner, it takes a few years to have a stable business. They finally have a stable business. They're looking at putting in a plan. It's key to them that there's enough of a tax benefit to help them make these contributions that are required by the non-discrimination rules. So the tax benefit gets them to put the plan in, and then it helps them spread that benefit to the other employees. Most tax preferences are really cash basis tax preferences. Oh, no. You've paid a lot of mortgage interest. And
Ms. Miller, could you suspend? I did not see Senator Thune.
Sorry.
No. Go ahead. No. Senator, I missed you, and I apologize.
I think that as we look at this, the current limit for IRAs for somebody that's under age 50, is $5,000 and $16,500 for an elective deferral, a personal contribution to a 401k plan. If there's employer money, then it can go up to $49,000. Now, a key component to us of maintaining the employer plan and encouraging it is that there be a differential between this $5,000 IRA contribution that you can make without making a contribution for your employees and the $16,500 that requires that you offer arrangements to your employees. Now, if you're looking at a small business, there can be a problem here in that, as I said, a lot of small businesses just don't have much money. The small business owners are not in the 35% tax bracket. And when they look at, you talk to them about putting in a plan, they can only afford, they can't afford much more than $5,000 themselves, and they say, I can do an IRA, my employees can do an IRA, what's the big deal? If we had something that was, and again, we don't have all the fine-tuning done, and many folks up here are already working on things like this, but if you had a multiple employer plan, if you had the ability for a small business to start a plan and just give people the opportunity to contribute without incurring additional liability, it could be very helpful. So you could maybe set the limit at $8,000 instead of, put it somewhere in the middle. Put them in a plan that year they have a good year, it's already there. They can make contributions for everybody. But in the meantime, right now, for example, one of the problems is that we've had these different 73% access, less than 50. A big part of that is, are we looking at part-time workers or not? The incentives set up in the code have been deliberately set up for substantially full-time workers. So it's really not fair to say if they've been effective for everybody. You should be looking at full-time workers to say if they've been effective. And if you want to expand them, go ahead and expand them. But you should be comparing results for the group that has been targeted. A small employer who decides to let somebody in that they don't have to let them in, suddenly they have to put 3% of pay in. It's an additional challenge. So to answer your question, we always would like to see higher limits, and I really do think that it would encourage more participation. But I think there's also room to expand coverage by looking in the middle and seeing what can be done by simplifying rules and creating options for employers that someday will want a plan that they can contribute to, but right now would be happy to help people contribute if they saw any good reason to do it other than figuring, they can use an IRA.
Good.